we now have with us James Baldwin, and he's going to talk about Fred Fox, the soldier,
Right.
and then work on his way to the killing.
Right. I pick up after the killing. Okay. One thing I like to do, ladies and gentlemen, is anyone in the audience who has military service, whether it was 2 years in the Army or longer, give me a hand. Let's give them a big hand. I had 26 years in the Air Force before they forced me to get out, because I told them I wasn't going to move one more time. I'd only moved 18 times in 26 years, and I said, no, ain't going to do it. Okay, real quick on my background, my great-grandfather was William G. Baldwin, owner and of the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency out of Roanoke and Bluefield. My grandfather himself dealt with the railroads. Tom Phelps, who was his partner, dealt with the coal mines. So all these coal miners up in these hills that are screaming about the Baldwin Phelps need to back up and say, the Phelps Detective Agency. Because W.G. Baldwin dealt with the railroads out there in that flatland. Okay, the first encounter that the Baldwin Phelps had was with my great-great-grandfather in 1861. He had been appointed as the 13th Congressional District of Southwest Virginia enrollment officer. He was the one that went out and got all of the boys to put on the gray and go fight them damn Yankees up north. I've got a whole scrapbook that has articles in it of saying Captain Dennison Butler Baldwin will be in such a place on such a day. Everyone between the ages of 18 and 45 report with 3 days of clothing, 3 days of food, and if you've got a medical problem, you better have all the paperwork when you get there. And as the further you go toward 1865, the wider that age gap gets, you know. And one of the things that I have learned in the research on this is people say, well, why when you're walking out across that open field, didn't you turn and run? You got to remember, the boy standing next to you may have been your next door neighbor. And if you turned around and run, when he got back home, you know what that Johnny did? He turned and run like a scalded dog. But Dennison Butler Baldwin enrolled Doc Taylor, John Wesley Wright, and Todd Hall into the Confederate Army. There's conflicting stories as to which unit they went in. The first presenter said he went into Company C of the Virginia Military. I found records where all three of them went in to the 13th Kentucky Mounted Cavalry, even though they were recruited in Virginia. 13th Kentucky Mounted Cavalry became Morgan's Raiders. And one of the things that they're famous for is their famous march up through Indiana and Ohio and then back into Southern Territory. Right. Rumors abound that he deserted after a month and came back to the Pound Gap area. Other reports say he was good until 1863 when he was captured by the Union forces in Pikesville. They sent him to Camp Chase in Columbus, Ohio. It started getting full, so they sent him to Camp Douglas in Chicago, 80 acres of hell. He signed his loyalty oath on the 26th of July, 1865, returned to the Pound Gap. That takes care of his military record. Now we get into after the killing. It's been covered by everybody here. Several weeks would go by since the killing without a trace of him. Nobody knew where he was. He knew the hills so well. Then reports started coming in that Doc Taylor was on the back roads accompanied by a large group of several armed men. One thing that Doc Taylor did during this time to keep the posses from tracking him, he took the heels off his shoes and put them on the toes, so that as he's walking down the road, it looks like he's going that way when really he's going that way. And the trackers would come up and say, "Ooh, we got to turn around. He's going that way." Well, Doc Taylor just giggling his life away. On several occasions, during the time of evasion from the law, he hid out in his son Sylvan and his wife Hattie's home in Norton, Virginia. Served as one of his many hiding places. At one point, Deputy Sheriff John Miller and his posse of about 20 men caught up with several of the outlaws and a gun battle ensued. Hennon Fleming was wounded. He was shot in the mouth. And Cal was lightly wounded. Now the two of them hid in a cave that had water dripping from the ceiling. Well, that was enough to close up all the wounds that they had. And that's where the report comes from that both Fleming boys had been killed by John Miller. Not true. They laid low, as I said, in the cave, and then they fled to West Virginia. And 2 years later, that's where Big Ed Hall decided he wanted some extra bounty money. So he took his buddies over to Boggs, West Virginia, because he had reports of that's where they were at. He walked into the post office in Boggs, and Calvin was mailing a letter. And Big Ed Hall says, "Calvin, it's your time to go. You're either going back to Virginia or you're going elsewhere." 14 by 18 room with 23 people in it. Only 2 people were wounded, or actually killed. Big Ed Hall, our reports have nothing to confirm it, and the other was Calvin Fleming. They took Hennon Fleming and brought him back to Wise, Virginia. During the time that Doc Taylor was out running around the hills, he ran into Reverend Robin Beverly. Now, Oakley Dean, who was earlier, that is his second great-grandfather.
He was a circuit rider or preacher.
Well, he was a preacher and a mountain evangelist on the old circuit rider days. Circuit riding preachers would ride from town to town and hold camp and tent revivals. Living in Letcher County, they traveled a great deal in this part of Virginia and Kentucky. On one of these trips with his wife, a man suddenly jumped out of the woods and stopped them in their tracks. He jumped out like a wild tiger, according to Reverend Beverly. Reverend Beverly recognized him as Doc Taylor, who just weeks before had been accused of killing Ira Mullins at some place referred to as the Killing Rock. And now was on the run evading. Reverend Beverly shared that he was a preacher headed for a camp revival and found favor with Doc Taylor. And Doc Taylor says, go on your way. But then, as they got ready to leave, Doc Taylor says, hold on a minute, hold on a minute. Well, Reverend Beverly thought he was going to lose his horse, his saddle, all his money, and whatever he had. And so he stopped, turned around and looked at the Red Fox, and Red Fox says, give me all of your chewing tobacco. And Reverend Beverly says, why? And Doc Taylor says, I can't go into town and buy any. And then he told Reverend Beverly, go on your way, but don't tell anybody you've seen me. You know, just...
He must have told him.
Well, this is just a couple more weeks and then he did. Doc Taylor disappeared back into the woods just as quick as he came out. All remained quiet until July of 1892. Other presenters have covered what happened at the Killing Rock. Newspaper reports where he was hiding in the mountains and hollers around Pound. Doc Taylor told everyone who would listen, I'm going west. I'm getting out of here. Well, that was what he told them. His actual plan was that he had Sylvan go down to the hardware store and get a box for shipping fresh, new trees in. Sylvan dressed him in a new suit, put $60 in his pocket, nailed him in the box. He had water and other things. Put him on the train bound for Bluefield, West Virginia. The label on the box was Florida. Well, somebody got wind of it. We don't know who, whether it was somebody on the train, whether it was the deputy district attorney at that time, but they called the Baldwin Railroad Detectives out of Bluefield, which was the name of the organization in 1892, and they told him, arrest Doc Taylor when he gets off the train. There was a $400 reward posted for the capture of Doc Taylor. Now, $400 in that, back in that days, that was good pocket money. There are two different stories, and I'm going to tell two of them, and then I'm going to add a third one. William G. Baldwin received the telegram that Doc Taylor was on the train from Norton, Virginia. W.G. greeted the train with a .44-40 pistol pointed right at Doc Taylor as he got off the passenger car, because he'd gotten out of the box and into the passenger car. And he says, "You're mine." So he took him to Bluefield, Virginia, which now puts him in the same state where the crime had been committed. Then W.G. got back on the train in Bluefield, West Virginia, went to Wise to find out whether the $400 reward was real. Because it hadn't been put up by the state, it hadn't been put up by the county or the city. It was put up by private individuals. So the sheriff says, yeah, it's real. We got it right here. So WG got back on the train, went back to Bluefield, got Doc Taylor out of the cell, put him on the train, brought him to Wise, and put him in the jail in Wise. Now, the second story goes that WG's brother, Robert Moore, and Dennis and Oscar met the train in Bluefield, saw all of the passengers get off, thought they recognized Doc Taylor, but they weren't real sure. They'd never seen a picture of him before, didn't know what was going on. So Doc Taylor walked through the depot, across the street to the Bluefield Inn, which in 1892 was the fanciest hotel in all of Bluefield. He registered as a guest, spent the night. The two Baldwin brothers, which only lived a block and a half from the train depot, said, well, we'll just come back in the morning when the train gets ready to leave. Well, Doc Taylor took the old razor to his face and a pair of scissors to his hair and cut it fairly short. They weren't sure still whether they recognized him. So he says, well, let's get on the train and wait till it gets into Virginia and then confront him. Well, they did, and he says, yeah, I'm Doc Taylor, and I'm accused of the murders in Pound. And this was near a little place called Pulaski, Virginia. And they said, well, we don't know the sheriff in Pulaski, but we know the mayor, we know the sheriff down in Tazewell, because that's where we were born. We know everybody down there. Because Daddy at one time had been the mayor and the county treasurer from 1865 until 1888 when he left, or 1885 when he left and went to Charleston. So they put him in the Tazewell jail. Robert Moore Baldwin got on the train, went to Wise, found out the $400 was real, came back, got him, took him back to Wise. But he told him, he says, if that reward isn't real, I'm going to turn you loose. Just let you go. It was real. Guess what? He wound up back in Wise. Now the third one, and this is one that just came out. It was printed in 2010 that Big Ed Hall got wind of Doc Taylor being on the train. So he rushed down to the train depot, bought a ticket, jumped on a train, and in Bluefield arrested him and brought him back to Wise. You know, why wait 50 years to try and prove something? That one's already been defunct and everything else. They returned him to, they arrested him on the 20th of July, 1892. Returned him on the 21st. The 26th of July, he went on trial for the murder. He was housed in the jail till the trial started on the 26th. Trial concluded on the 3rd. Jury found him guilty. You're going to hang. You're going to swing. Well, the jail at Wise was almost falling down. To give you an example, the jail in Andy Griffith Mayberry RFD made the Wise jail look like the one in Mayberry RFD was Alcatraz. Even though Otis used to walk in, open the door, close it, reach around, grab the key, lock it, and then hang it back up. the jail at Wise was in such bad condition that the sheriff would only had 5 prisoners in the entire jail. Most of those were for being drunk in public, and a few for jaywalking. So he sent the 2 famous prisoners at that time, Todd Hall and Doc Taylor, sent them to Lynchburg, Virginia, and put them in jail in Lynchburg. Now, those 2 individuals were strictly under the care of the Baldwin railroad detectives. They told the Lynchburg jail guards, these 2 are ours. Don't even talk to them. They're ours. And Doc Taylor found out in December of 1862 that the Virginia Court of Appeals was not even going to give him a hearing until July of 1893. And so he sat in the Lynchburg jail until July, when the court says, there's no new evidence, sorry, you're going to hang. So they sent him back to Wise. By then they had a new jail, and the court says, you're going to hang. He had made 3 requests of the judge. One, that he be buried in a white suit. Now, Nancy, not having much money as it was, cut up a county-owned tablecloth to make his white suit. They charged Doc Taylor with destruction of county property, made him pay for it. The second was he wanted to preach his own funeral sermon from the 2nd floor of the Wise County Courthouse. Well, the day that he wanted to do it, there was about 5,000 people on the lawn. And the people in charge in the courthouse were afraid that a lot of those were people that were going to break him out of jail. So they said, no, you can do it tomorrow. It was raining. There was only about 3,000 people. He was standing in the 2nd floor window with Nancy standing next to him. You can see him in the white suit. Nancy's wearing a black dress, and she almost disappears. You've got to blow that picture way up in order to see her. And the third thing he asked of the court was, after he got hung, to be put in the casket for 3 days, because at the end of the 3 days, he was going to rise up and take care of his flock again. Now, was he buried in the backyard? Was there a log substituted in the casket and the log was buried in the backyard? Nobody knows, because they won't let us dig him up. And where they think he's at, his grandchildren say, no, he's not there. All you're going to get is moving a headstone. During the appeal trial, when the court told Doc Taylor, you're going to hang, he says, but I'm insane and that's my new defense. And the judge says, there are 3 other directions, Doc Taylor, pick one. You know, when his hanging day finally came, he was dressed in his white suit. Nancy put a white cap on his head. He walked to the gallows. As he started to go up the gallows, they put white booties on his feet so that he wouldn't soil the inside of the gallows. Now, if you ever looked at a picture of that, It's completely enclosed on the upper side and the lower side, and there's a gentleman standing there at the top of the stairs with his hand on the door so he can open it and close it and let people in. Reports are there were 13 people, 13 Masons, inside of the gallows. He hugged them, shook hands with them, and said, "I'll see you later." At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they heard a thud and a clunk. You hear sounds? Who knows what's going on? Supposedly the doctors declared him dead about 22 minutes later. But again, reports are he and Nancy and the 3 girls went to Missouri. The information I presented is not to sway people one way or another. It's just to give them an overview of what everybody thinks happened. Are there any questions, ladies and gentlemen?